What if we integrate? Are you concerned at all about things like Neuralink? And there's some other competitive technologies, people that initially started with Neuralink that are working now they're starting with eyesight to develop artificial eyes for people that are blind and do so implementing a similar type of technology where you're using some sort of computer interface, something that interacts with human biology, but permanently and embedded.
Well, I will say that in principle, I'm very concerned about things like Neuralink. In practice, I'm less concerned because I think the job is harder than we've understood. That said, I'd be very interested in talking to Elon about this. My understanding from others I have spoken to is that part of the motivation is so that AI can't get ahead of us.
Right.
Right? The idea is this is really our only mechanism for staying ahead of the AI escalator by being on it. Right? So that as it gets smarter, we get smarter. Now, I don't know how good a plan that is. It does not sound very plausible to me. And the devil is in the details with respect. There's a lot of tricks you can play linking machines to neurons, right? You can, for example, learn to control a computer mouse, with your mind, but you're not really, it's not like the computer mouse is integrated with you. What you're effectively doing is learning to think something hard enough that you can cause a detector to know that you want it to go this way or that way. So it's a learnable skill, and it's real. It's important. But it's not the same thing as being able to plug a mouse into you and have it understand what you're doing, right?
But is that just for now?
Yes.
Because if you think about, like, in my lifetime, we've gone from Pong, which was a thing that you played on your television, and it was so wild that you could move a dial on this little console, and then you could move the paddle up and down. And I can remember playing with my sister, and we were like, wow, this is crazy. And then that went, and then, of course, you went from that to what we have now, things like, like these video games that are incredibly realistic. Like we've played these examples from the Unreal Engine. There's a new Unreal Engine that does real-time shading and light in this spectacular way. And you have this this video character running in these hills, and it creates dirt, and you see the sunrise, and all the lights are they're interacting with the ground and creating these realistic shadows, and it's so crazy to see. And so for me in my lifetime to have gone from Pong to this is such an enormous leap that I would imagine that this brain mouse interface would improve in a similar way to the point where, or even crazier, you're dealing with like some incredibly realistic virtual reality that's indiscernible from reality itself.
Well, look, all of that stuff is happening already in a form that isn't so terrifying, and maybe that's the problem with it, right? The fact is you can now interact with a keyboard with this chat engine, and it can respond more or less like a human being if you stay on the right kinds of topics. Right? So how different is it? How importantly different is it that you're interacting through a keyboard than if you could plug it into yourself? So I'm dubious about the plug it into yourself part of the story, but I'm not at all dubious that there's some very important thing already happening where you're interacting through a controller or some other thing like that. And I would also just finally say the Matrix, which we kind of are living in and kind of aren't living in, is a virtual reality. And when you and I have the experience of going and looking at somebody's Twitter page, and it's like they literally live on a different planet where up is down, that's because they're experiencing a kind of virtual reality that is not the same one that we're plugged into. And I think, you and I are struggling to not be plugged into virtual reality. We're trying to retain a grip on actual reality, which is hard as hell in this era. But there are those who have, surrendered to the Matrix the way Cypher does in the film, right? They would just rather, not struggle against it, because what are they going to do?
Well, I think they're also ideologically captured to the point where they don't consider any of these other perspectives. And they only think within their echo chamber that this is the correct way to do it, and everybody outside of that is the enemy. So they've been captured in this way that it's just sort of inherent to the human condition to think tribally.
Well, I would say the way to think about it is that for almost all of human history, one's well-being within one's social group, which is very often a lineage, is the vital parameter that dictates how well off you are in evolutionarily meaningful terms. And so to the extent that that's the case, people become very easily manipulated as you threaten them with expulsion from polite society.
Yes.
And we've seen our friends succumb to this.
Yeah.
You've lost friends, I've lost friends. It's very disturbing, but it's also, we have to remember, it's not surprising that a human being faced with being ostracized reacts like a drowning person. Right? They become a lethal hazard because they will do anything not to drown, not to be expelled. And I guess, there's so much we haven't talked about here, but the lesson of the last several years, we've watched people go crazy. We've watched people go after us. That seems to have lifted somewhat. There's a dawning consciousness of what actually took place. It certainly hasn't reached everybody, but it's reached a lot more people than it had before. And I would encourage us all to treat this as a learning exercise, that we have seen what people are capable of, and we are now returned to a slightly calmer state for who knows how long, but we damn well better figure out what happened so it can't happen again.